authorized to declare recess at any time. Before I deliver my opening remarks, I want to note today the committee is meeting virtually and announce a couple of reminders to the members about conduct of this hearing. First, members should keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing, and members are responsible for their own microphones. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And finally, if members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk, whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome our distinguished panel of witnesses, members, and those viewing remotely to today's Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee hearing on cybersecurity at NASA, ongoing challenges and emerging issues for increased telework during COVID-19. In early 2020, the world was caught off guard with the rapid and dramatic onset of the coronavirus. NASA, like many federal agencies, and consistent with the Office of Management and Budget guidance, rapidly shifted to a telework operations to ensure the health and safety of its more than 17,000 civil servant employees and extensive contractor workforce. To its credit, NASA prepared for the transition, having held an agency-wide telework exercise in early March to test expanded telework operations. And today, 75 to 80% of NASA civil servants continue to work remotely, handling proposal reviews, project oversight and inspections, development work, engineering analysis, and other activities. The shift to increased telework at NASA raises many questions. Front and center, cybersecurity. What does the increase and extended use of telework mean for protecting NASA's intellectual property, personally identifiable information, and mission operations? How do the cyber challenges related to increased telework affect the agency's overall cybersecurity risk posture? And what steps is NASA taking to ensure the effectiveness of its cybersecurity efforts during the pandemic and beyond? These are some of the questions today's hearing will explore, because what's clear is that NASA is a target. And I want to pause here for a moment to note an article in The Hill today where the Justice Department has brought charges against Iranian nationals for hacking U.S. satellite companies. So I think this is incredibly timely. And a recent NASA IG report stated that given NASA's mission and valuable technical and intellectual capital it produces, the information maintained within the agency's IT infrastructure presents a high-value target for hackers and criminals. In 2019, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine stated at an agency town hall that NASA is the most attacked agency in the federal government when it comes to cybersecurity. Past data breaches and system intrusions at NASA and its facilities have resulted in large amounts of stolen data, installation of malware, copying, modifying, and deleting sensitive files, and accessing NASA servers, including those supporting missions. The Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, which is a mouthful, of course, CISA, but a very important agency, has issued specific alerts on vulnerabilities related to telework during the pandemic and encourages organizations to adopt a heightened state of cybersecurity. In April 2020, the agency's then Chief Information Officer notified employees of increased hacking attempts on the agency's systems. And in June 2020, media articles reported that malicious actors congratulated NASA and SpaceX on a crewed demonstration flight and then announced they had allegedly breached and infected a NASA contractor, specifically one that provides information technology, cybersecurity services to the agency. If true, that's a concerning report and part of the reason we're here today. Protecting NASA's IT and data during the pandemic demands vigilance. However, NASA's cybersecurity challenges don't begin and end with the COVID-19 crisis. Multiple NASA IG and GAO reports have identified weaknesses and ongoing concerns with NASA's information security. Further, they've ranked this issue as a top agency challenge. Ensuring effective cybersecurity at NASA becomes even more pressing given rapid advances in IT, supply chain risks, NASA's culture of openness and partnerships, and the overall increase in space activities. NASA is a national treasure. Its missions continue to inspire both young and old, and NASA's cutting-edge space technologies, research, and spaceflight experiences are the envy of the world. NASA's accomplishments wouldn't be possible without computers, software, and information systems. Will NASA or any organization ever be 100% risk-free from cyber threats? Probably not. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely, there is. I hope that today's hearing will give an understanding of the challenges and risks posed by increased telework and whether or not NASA is organized and resourced sufficiently and effectively to mitigate those risks. The bottom line is we need to ensure that NASA has the tools it needs and takes the necessary actions to ensure the agency's success, safety, and security during COVID-19 and beyond. And I look forward to our witnesses' testimony today. So I think we are, there he is.
Hey,
Ranking Member Babin, glad you were able, I know that technology can sometimes, speaking of technology, be a little bit of a challenge, but I'm glad you made it through. So the chair now recognizes Ranking Member Babin and my good friend from Texas for an opening statement.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have 3 computers here. We couldn't get on, but I got on with my telephone. So any way we can do it, I'm glad to be with you.
In innovation and ingenuity. I love it.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much. NASA is one of the best known organizations in the entire world. Its successes with the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo shuttle, and International Space Station programs, along with its breathtaking scientific discoveries and jaw-dropping robotic probes, attract worldwide attention. Unfortunately, that attention comes with many challenges. The technologies that NASA develops are also sought after by criminal entities, unscrupulous foreign governments, and destructive vandals. Because many of these technologies have both civil and military applications, these challenges are particularly grave. And this is a topic that this committee has focused on for decades. Mr. Martin testified before the Investigations and Oversight Subcommittee almost 10 years ago on the topic of information security. At that hearing, he testified that an unencrypted laptop was stolen from NASA that resulted in the loss of the algorithms, quote unquote, used to control the space station, as well as personally identifiable information and intellectual property. Similarly, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission noted in its 2011 report to Congress that the Terra and Landsat 7 satellites experienced at least 2 separate instances of interference apparently consistent with cyber activities against their command and control systems. More recently, the NASA IG issued its yearly FISMA report in July, which found that, quote, information systems throughout the agency face an unnecessarily high level of risk that threatens the confidentiality, the integrity, and availability of NASA's information, unquote. The report concluded that it is imperative the agency continue its efforts to strengthen its risk management and governance practices to safeguard its data from cybersecurity threats, unquote. And last month, the IG issued another report on NASA's use of non-agency IT devices that found that NASA is not adequately securing its networks from unauthorized access by IT devices, unquote. The NASA IG is currently tracking 25 open recommendations for the Office of the Chief Information Officer. These do not include IT and cybersecurity recommendations to mission directorates or other organizations in the NASA enterprise. And while this may seem startling, there are specific reasons that many of the recommendations remain open. For instance, agency-wide guidelines and best practices are often general rules and principles that are not optimized to specific agencies' unique capabilities, expertise, and challenges. For instance, NASA is the world leader in designing, building, operating, and communicating with spacecraft. This expertise resides within the mission directorates and at the centers who have cultivated this expertise over many decades. In some instances, they actually developed the software, information systems, and underlying technologies that industry and the rest of the government adopted and embraced. And even more extreme circumstances, they continue to use one-off operating systems that, while perhaps not compliant with OMB-derived government-wide guidance, are arguably more secure because of their uniqueness and their obscurity. Efforts to bring these systems and technologies into compliance with a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approaches development for commercial and enterprise systems could actually introduce more risk into the system. This isn't to excuse NASA's cybersecurity shortcomings as identified by the IG and GAO over the years. Lost laptops, unsecured devices, unauthorized access to systems, and lapsed ATOs, or authorization to operate, and poor inventory management are all cause for concern. Which brings us to the situation that NASA currently faces. The COVID-19 challenge requires most of NASA's employees and contractors to work remotely. And while NASA has embraced teleworking for years, the expansion of this practice introduces a larger target and more vulnerabilities for malicious actors to exploit. In addition to teleworking challenges, I'm also interested in understanding what level of insight that NASA has on contractor cybersecurity as NASA moves more to public-private partnerships. And finally, it's worth noting that President Trump recently issued Space Policy Directive Number 5, focused on cybersecurity principles for space systems. And while it is not COVID focused specifically, it is particularly timely given today's hearing and demonstrates the administration's forward-looking leadership on this very topic. I look forward to hearing more about these important issues and what NASA plans to do to mitigate them, as well as what Congress and the administration can do to help. So with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Babin, for your opening statement. I think it's safe to say we share many of the same concerns in this area, and I'm excited and grateful for the opportunity for this hearing today. If there are any members who wish to, at this point, if there are any members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Mr. Jeff Seaton. In April of 2020, Mr. Seaton was named NASA's Acting Chief Information Officer. Let's see if I can get that out right. Prior to his current position, Mr. Seaton served as NASA's Deputy Chief Information Officer and spent 7 years as the Chief Information Officer at NASA's Langley Research Center. He began his career with NASA in 1991 as a research engineer, designing robotic systems for space-based applications, and also served as Langley's Chief Technology Officer and Deputy CIO. Mr. Seaton received a bachelor's degree and master's degree in electrical engineering from Virginia Tech. Welcome, Mr. Seaton. We're glad you're with us today. Our next witness is Mr. Paul Martin, Inspector General for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Mr. Martin has been the NASA Inspector General since 2009. And prior to his appointment at NASA, he served as the Deputy Inspector General at the Department of Justice. He also spent 13 years at the U.S. Sentencing Commission, including 6 years as the Commission's Deputy Staff Director. Mr. Martin received a bachelor's degree in journalism from Pennsylvania State University and a Juris Doctorate from Georgetown University Law Center. Welcome, Mr. Martin. Our third and final witness today is Dr. Diana Burley. In July 2020, Dr. Burley was appointed as Vice Provost for Research and Professor of Public Administration at American University. Prior to her current position, Dr. Burley spent 13 years as a Professor of Human and Organizational Learning at George Washington University, where she was the inaugural chair for the Human and Organizational Learning Department and the Director of Executive Leadership Doctoral Program. She has also managed a multi-million-dollar computer science education and research portfolio for the National Science Foundation. Dr. Burley received a bachelor's degree in economics from the Catholic University of America, a master's in public management and policy from Carnegie Mellon University, and a master's and doctoral degrees in organizational science and information policy, also from Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, Dr. Burley. As our witnesses, you should know you each have 5 minutes for your spoken testimony. Your written testimony will be included in the record for this hearing. When you have completed your spoken testimony, we will begin with questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. We'll start today with Mr. Seaton. Mr. Seaton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Horn, Ranking Member Babin, and members of the Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics for allowing me to appear before you today and talk about NASA's information technology infrastructure and our efforts to manage and protect that infrastructure during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thankfully, due to strategic investments made over the last several years, NASA was well positioned to keep our missions moving forward by shifting the majority of our workforce to telework last March. As a result, NASA has never been closed, and our workforce has continued to work remotely in a productive and often creative manner, despite the highly contagious COVID-19 virus. With strict safety protocols in place, NASA is now gradually allowing more employees on site based on factors such as local conditions and guidance from the CDC and other federal partners. Let me assure you, the safety of our workforce remains our top priority. At the same time, protecting and effectively operating our IT infrastructure continues to be another top NASA focus. IT plays a critical role in every aspect of NASA's missions. However, effective IT management is not an easy task. As NASA's acting Chief Information Officer, it's my job to balance implementing innovative, mission-enabling IT capabilities with operational efficiency and effective cybersecurity to guard against evolving threats. During the pandemic, the demands and expectations placed on NASA's IT infrastructure have been incredibly high, and the threats from external actors remain an ongoing concern. However, with hard work, dedication, and innovation, NASA's CIO team has risen to the challenge of keeping our missions moving forward. For example, OCIO helped rapidly develop software to track cases of on-site COVID-19 exposures while also meeting all security and privacy requirements. Additionally, with OCIO's help, NASA continues to hire and onboard new employees, contractors, and interns with innovative approaches to provisioning and maintaining IT systems and tools remotely. For NASA employees, the pandemic has dramatically changed the way that we work. While many employees already teleworked at least occasionally before the pandemic, having 90% of employees teleworking at the same time has been game-changing. NASA employees have significantly increased their use of virtual collaboration tools such as WebEx and Microsoft Teams so we can interact with each other face-to-face while sharing virtual collaborative workspaces. Employees are dependent on NASA's virtual private network to connect securely to internal networks and systems. Before the pandemic, our highest VPN connection rate was about 12,000 users in a single day. Today, our VPN is supporting almost 40,000 daily users with an availability exceeding 99%, thanks to architectural and capacity improvements implemented over the past 24 months. Like other federal agencies, NASA's IT infrastructure is under constant attack from well-resourced and highly motivated domestic and foreign adversaries, and we remain a popular target today. Therefore, we continue to strengthen our technical and procedural capabilities to proactively defend and protect our systems and data. While the reported number of attempted cyber incidents continues to increase, partly because we have greater visibility into our network today, I'm confident that NASA is appropriately addressing and strengthening our response to these threats. In fiscal year 2020, NASA developed a continuity of operations capability to further enhance our Security Operations Center located at the Ames Research Center. Previously, if SOC operations were disrupted, we had a limited ability to identify, detect, and respond to incidents. Today, NASA SOC operations span multiple centers, allowing us to maintain 24/7 SOC operations at all times, even if there is an isolated disruption. With strengthened tools and capabilities, NASA is transitioning from a largely reactive to a more proactive cybersecurity posture. As the pandemic worsened in April, NASA even moved the SOC to remote operations to ensure employee safety, and we did so without negatively impacting our network or our cybersecurity capabilities. In closing, I want to personally thank not only my OCIO staff and leadership, but the entire NASA workforce for their hard work and the personal sacrifices they've made during this challenging time. Our employees are finding new ways to keep missions moving forward, support each other, balance work and family pressures, and even dedicate their expertise and personal time to developing technologies that are aiding in the national response to the coronavirus. While no one is sure what the future holds, NASA senior leaders, including myself, are committed to keeping the NASA workforce safe and providing them with the IT tools and infrastructure they need to continue executing our missions. I want to assure you that protecting and evolving NASA's IT infrastructure is and will remain a top agency priority. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today, and I look forward to answering any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Seaton. Mr. Martin, you are now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Horn, Ranking Member Babin, and members of the subcommittee. The NASA Office of Inspector General has conducted a significant amount of oversight work to help NASA improve its information technology governance while securing its networks and data from cyber attacks. Over the past 5 years, we issued 16 audit reports with 72 recommendations related to IT governance and security. During this same period, we've conducted more than 120 investigations involving intrusions, denial of service attacks, and data breaches on NASA networks, several of which have resulted in criminal convictions. My testimony today is informed by this body of audit and investigative work. The soundness and security of its data and IT systems is central to NASA's success. The agency spends more than $2.2 billion a year on a portfolio of IT assets that include hundreds of information systems used to control spacecraft, collect and process scientific data, and enable NASA personnel to collaborate with colleagues around the world. Given the valuable technical and intellectual capital NASA produces, its IT systems present a high-value target for cyber criminals. The past 6 months in particular has tested the agency, as more than 90% of NASA's workforce moved from on-site to remote work due to the pandemic. During this period, NASA has experienced an uptick in cyber threats, with phishing attempts doubling and malware attacks rising substantially. This morning, I offer 3 observations about the state of NASA's IT security and governance to provide context for the scope of its challenges. First, our concerns with NASA's IT governance and security are wide-ranging and long-standing. For more than 2 decades, NASA has struggled to implement an effective IT governance structure that aligns authority and responsibility commensurate with the agency's overall mission. Specifically, the agency's CIO has limited oversight and influence over IT purchases and security decisions within mission directorates and at NASA centers. This decentralized nature of NASA's operations, coupled with its historic culture of autonomy, have hindered the CIO's ability to implement effective enterprise-wide IT governance. Moreover, NASA's connectivity with educational institutions and other outside organizations, and its vast online presence of 3,000 web domains and more than 42,000 publicly accessible data sets, offers cyber criminals a larger target than most other government agencies. Second, despite positive forward momentum, the agency's IT practices continue to fall short of federal requirements. For example, in 2019, for the 4th year in a row, NASA's performance during our annual FISMA review remained at level 2 out of 5, meaning the agency has issued, but has not consistently implemented, important policies and procedures defining its IT security program. And third, like many other public and private organizations, NASA struggles to find the right balance between user flexibility and system security. For example, for years, NASA permitted personally owned and partner-owned mobile IT devices to access non-public data, even if those devices did not have a valid authorization. Today, NASA employees and partners can use non-agency mobile devices to access email if the user installs security software known as mobile device management. However, an OIG audit last month found that NASA was not adequately securing its email networks from unauthorized access by these personally owned devices. Although NASA has deployed technologies to monitor unauthorized connections, it has not fully implemented controls to remove or block those devices. Moreover, the agency's December 2019 target for installing these controls was delayed due to technological issues and pandemic-related center closures. Until these enforcement controls are fully implemented, NASA faces an elevated risk of a breach. Finally, as part of its MAP initiative, NASA plans to centralize and consolidate IT capabilities. The CIO's office expects to complete its MAP assessment by March 2021. with implementation on its institutional systems beginning later that year. As MAP unfolds, we plan to assess whether this enterprise-level alignment has strengthened cybersecurity at NASA. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Dr. Burley, you're recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. Subcommittee Chairwoman Horn, Ranking Member Babin, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. As the nation continues to navigate the complex and uncertain environment of the global pandemic, it is vital that we engage in a robust discussion on the cybersecurity-related challenges and emerging issues for increased telework during this time. At American University, we are guided by our strategic plan, Changemakers for a Changing World. AU empowers graduates to navigate, shape, and lead the future of work, and AU researchers are pushing the boundaries of discovery in healthcare, data science, social equity, and security. In my remarks today, which are shaped by a decades-long career leading cybersecurity initiatives, I will highlight how the interplay of these areas supports the development of a holistic strategy to address cybersecurity issues surrounding the exponential growth in telework during this unprecedented time. Concerns over exposure to COVID-19 have accelerated a mass migration to virtual settings. While teleworking arrangements have existed for years, never before have we seen the range and volume of remote workers or remote working environments. Employees across the spectrum of demographic categories and technical abilities are now working remotely and engaging with their employers, colleagues, and customers through a digital interface and on a range of devices. Securing this activity necessitates that we recognize both the technical needs and the environmental factors that shape that behavior. Consider the following. Novice users and novice experiences create vulnerabilities. In the hurried transition to remote work, agencies did not have sufficient time to prepare novice users for the complexity of their newly virtual working environments, where overall security is more reliant upon individual decisions made by employees and non-employees alike. Even seasoned users who have developed behaviors in accordance with on-site protections face new challenges and can find themselves less prepared to avoid the vulnerabilities exposed by their remote working environments. Employees are working under duress. COVID-19 continues to drive economic instability, health-related concerns, anxiety, and confusion. Employees are worried about meeting their basic needs and are less likely to attend to seemingly lower priorities like cybersecurity. Cyber criminals exploit targets of opportunity. The shift in activity provides a larger attack surface and leads to more opportunities for cyber criminals to use social engineering techniques such as fraud, misdirection, and disinformation to exploit those vulnerabilities. Users bring their entire selves online. If we use a public health analogy of treating the whole patient, we can strengthen the efficacy of guidance to engage in robust cyber hygiene activities. In public health practice, successful treatment is inextricably linked to the social and environmental conditions of its patients. Today, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, we must recognize that while basic cyber hygiene practice is relatively doable under normal circumstances, these are not normal times. Our workers are distracted, frightened, and fatigued. This is especially true for the most vulnerable users. As such, strategies to strengthen the cybersecurity of teleworkers must consider the full spectrum of user experiences and address the complex realities of their needs. The points I have just outlined represent only a snapshot of the benefit of using a holistic approach to reduce the impact of cybersecurity-related vulnerabilities. I have long advocated for this type of approach. Now, and with a greater sense of urgency, we must collaboratively develop interventions that address the dynamic interplay between technical and environmental variables that shape the cybersecurity posture across the broad range of teleworkers as they navigate the COVID-19 environment. I look forward to continued engagement with this esteemed committee to develop concrete strategies that raise awareness of the threat, encourage actions that increase the cybersecurity of the nation's employees, and protect our most vulnerable citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Burley. At this point, we will begin our first round of questions, and the chair recognizes herself for 5 minutes. Thank you to our witnesses today. It's clear that these are important issues and there's a lot of things to tackle. And I want to start, Mr. Seaton, with some questions about contractors and cybersecurity contractors, especially given the increased use and the significant use of contractors within NASA's workforce. So I have a number of questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as we can. Some of them are just yes or no. Then we'll get to a few other things. So what we know, and I mentioned the article today in The Hill, is that our systems there's a lot of information that hackers are very interested in. And the contractors that NASA works with are integral to our nation's space agency. So my first question is, are there FAR clauses, federal acquisition regulation clauses, that specifically refer to contractor cybersecurity requirements?
Yes, there are, and we include those in our agency contracts to ensure that our providers follow the cybersecurity requirements.
Okay. So let me follow up on that for a moment, because those are NASA cybersecurity requirements, because we asked earlier this year about associated FAR language, and NASA's response was that there are no FAR requirements, there are no FAR clauses, but do those fall under NASA requirements in contracts?
We have a NASA FAR supplement, and to get specifics on what those requirements are included via that, I can certainly take a question for the record to get back to that.
Absolutely. And so when those clauses are included, is it NASA that signs off on the cybersecurity? Are there waivers? Who signs off on the requirements for cybersecurity that they've been met?
Well, we have automated tools to be able to ensure that our contractors are complying with the requirements when they're connecting to any NASA system, just as any NASA employee would. As was mentioned in the earlier testimony, we've put in place controls and are continuing to strengthen those controls to ensure that only authorized devices can connect to our networks and systems.
Okay, and who has oversight of contractor cybersecurity protocols? Is that through your office? Are you able to conduct oversight and audits of cybersecurity practices by contractors?
Ultimately, I am the acting chief information officer, and so cybersecurity is my responsibility. And so it would be me and my team that ensures compliance with the cybersecurity requirements.
Okay. Do you feel like you have sufficient oversight and insight and ability to do that within your authorized authority, within your authorities?
Yes, I would say that I do believe that within NASA, I've been given the appropriate authority and support, but I will say that the environment is continuing to change, and it's a dynamic landscape. As IT is no longer just the computer and the laptop on your desk, but expands to operational technology where IT is embedded within systems. And so I would say it's challenging with that evolving landscape, and so we continue to mature our processes.
Okay, thank you. Stepping back to the challenges from this year during COVID-19, I'll have a question for Mr. Martin and Mr. Seaton, and hopefully we'll have time to get to Dr. Burley about a broader. The memo, Mr. Seaton, that your predecessor published on April 8th warned of increased attempts and cyber attacks, and especially during COVID-19. My first question is to you, actually, then to Mr. Martin. How has the rate of cyber attacks changed since that memo in April, and what steps has the OCIO taken to respond to those increased attempts?
Well, we have seen an increase in phishing attacks and at a lower level, some other attacks. But honestly, the change to the pandemic operating model is consistent with how NASA has operated in the past. We've supported a mobile workforce, and so have put in place controls and technologies to mitigate against some of these threats, including automated prevention of phishing attacks. Because when it comes down to it, you and I are the most vulnerable part of our IT security environment is the people. And so we try to put in place automated controls to actually make that easier for our employees, and have seen significant improvements in phishing protections over the last 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And quickly, Mr. Martin, my time is coming to an end, but what is your confidence level in NASA's ability to sufficiently address and increase the increase in cyber threats as reported by the OCIO?
Overall, I think they're making incremental improvement. They're heading in the right direction, and I think there's a real new realization over the last couple of years of the expanse and significance of the challenge. So I think we're very, very cautiously optimistic.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I now recognize Ranking Member Babin for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'm unmuted. Hopefully I am. I would address this to Chief Information Officer, Mr. Seaton. 2 weeks ago, President Trump signed Space Policy Directive number 5, which focused on cybersecurity principles for space systems. SPD 5 states, "It is the policy of the United States that executive departments and agencies will foster practices within government space operations and across the commercial space industry that protect space assets and their supporting infrastructure from cyber threats and ensure continuity of operations." My question is this: as NASA increases its use of public-private partnerships, how will it ensure that contractors comply with this policy without implementing regulations?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So SPD 5, we appreciate the administration and this Congress's focus on space cybersecurity because that's critically important to us. We're currently in the process of reviewing and analyzing SPD 5. But the good news is we see a lot of consistency with best practices that we are already implementing, and we'll continue to look to strengthen our cybersecurity, both within our missions as well as with our contract partners.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My next question would be to Inspector General Paul Martin. Your office issued a report on JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratories, cybersecurity management last year. JPL, unlike other NASA centers, is managed by a contractor. Of course, that's Caltech. The report highlighted the fact that NASA's contract with Caltech did not include relevant requirements from NASA IT security policies. And so has the OIG conducted a review of other NASA contractors to determine if their contracts include necessary clauses pertaining to IT security? And if so, how many has your office conducted?
Thank you, Mr. Babin. We have not conducted a separate audit looking at that specific issue, although if I could double back, the concerns we had when NASA entered into a new 5-year contract with Caltech, that the contract was absent these significant IT oversight provisions. We have since followed up and found out that JPL has issued and NASA has accepted, and we reviewed, and they do meet the criteria that we were concerned about. So the federal imposed oversight, IT oversight, is going to happen at JPL. So we're pleased with that.
Okay, thank you. And does the OIG conduct compliance audits to determine if contractors are fulfilling their contractual obligations pertaining to information security? And if so, how many has your office conducted there?
Again, we conduct a significant number of program audits that look at the programs that are run by these contractors. And part of that review includes a detailed dive into the contracts to make sure that the IT security requirements are not only in the contract, but they're actually followed.
Is this a more appropriate role for the NASA CIO or procurement office to conduct rather than the OIG?
Well, I think the audit, certainly the CIO's office and procurement have to ensure at the outset that the appropriate security issues and safeguards are contained in the audit themselves. And ongoing good contract management would show that you need to ensure that they're being effective. Now, the OIG has limited capacity, like most organizations, and so we're going to try to target the more high risk, high value operations that NASA has to do a deep dive audit.
Okay, and then as this very hearing demonstrates, NASA and the nation have adopted video conferencing to adapt to social distancing requirements. Has NASA identified any vulnerabilities with commercial video conferencing platforms? Are certain video conference platforms not allowed for NASA use based on technical characteristics or concerns over foreign influence? I would just see what every one of you have to say, just a short, concise answer.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with that and say we have a set of approved tools that have gone through the appropriate security validation, which includes assessing any threats externally to those environments. And outside of that, other tools are not approved for use within NASA.
Okay. And then
the NASA OIG is using those approved tools.
Okay. All right, good. And Dr. Burley, did you want to add to that at all?
Most agencies and other organizations have their list of approved tools.
Okay. Well, Madam Chair, that's I've spent all my time, and so I will yield back. And I want to thank all the witnesses. We appreciate it very much. Yield back.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Babin. Mr. Perlmutter, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think one of the biggest problems with this remote stuff is when somebody like Dr. Babin is walking around with his phone, and I feel like we're on the Blair Witch Project, but that's a whole other problem. My questions are for you, Dr. Burley, and Mr. Seaton mentioned the most vulnerable spot for hacking and cybersecurity is the individual, the person. And when you were testifying, you talked about novice users, not familiar with the equipment or security protocol, employees under duress, worried about their basic needs and not the more refined things like cybersecurity. That the folks are having trouble because they're distracted, frightened, and fatigued, I think were your terms. So it almost feels not that the CIO should be involved, but the personnel department is really one of the keys here. So what do you see, whether it's NASA or generally across the agencies, being done to help the individuals kind of get through this very anxious period and maintain cybersecurity?
Thank you for your question. So you're absolutely right in that it needs to be a collaboration between the IT department and the HR department. So first, every agency has a set of cybersecurity awareness programs that they have in place and that really guide not only behavior within the organization and within the walls, but also outside. Those awareness programs need to be adapted, recognizing that the employees are working in a different environment, they're working remotely, and they're working around other people. It's not just them, it's also their family members and others who are in their environments. And so we have to take a hard look at those awareness programs and recognize that they need to be adapted based on the current realities of work. And second, yes, absolutely, human resource professionals need to be involved to provide the kind of support to our employees that they need so that they are able to focus on not only doing their work, but doing their work in a secure manner.
I guess I hadn't even thought of it, but obviously we should think of it. People are working from home, the kids are in the background, or whoever might be in the background. So it isn't like you're in the office at NASA headquarters where everything's pretty safe and secure. So I think, Madam Chair, I'm going to yield back, but I do think this really is a cooperation, certainly between the HR department and all of the technology folks. And Mr. Seaton, all three of our speakers have sort of focused on that, but in this pandemic, that's critical, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perlmutter. Mr. Posey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing on this important issue regarding cybersecurity at NASA during COVID-19. Just to recap somewhat, in June 2020, NASA's Inspector General stated, NASA's high profile and sensitive technology makes the agency an attractive target for computer hackers and other bad actors. And as stated earlier, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many NASA and contractor employees are teleworking and possibly making the agency a bigger target. In June 2020 report, the Inspector General said it's vital that the agency develop an integrated view of its information security program to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of its data, systems, and networks. This is not a new problem facing NASA. An assessment of the National Academy of Public Administration concluded back in 2014 that NASA networks are compromised and that individuals are not being held accountable. This is not a new concern for us either. I included language in the House-passed NASA authorization bill back in 2015 to address this by requiring a report on how NASA will safeguard its networks and protect against export control violations. The Inspector General also made 9 recommendations to NASA, including making sure the risk information security system compliance systems data protection capabilities are updated to keep the data secure. And the Inspector General concluded that the threats are increasing and that it is imperative for NASA to continue its efforts to strengthen its risk management and government practices to safeguard its data from cybersecurity threats. Inspector Martin, first, it was noted that the Inspector General that NASA is an attractive target for computer hackers and bad actors. Is China one of those bad actors? And does China present a cybersecurity threat to NASA? And besides securing its information technology, what steps has NASA done to secure its supply chain from China hackers? And has NASA or the Inspector General criminally referred a cybersecurity case involving China to the Department of Justice yet?
Yes, yes, no. I'm joking. That was a lot of questions. China is one of the foreign entities out there. China is not the sole country out there that is seeking NASA's very valuable intellectual property. NASA is taking steps and has been to secure its intellectual property and its networks from attack, both from China and from a series of other countries and also local hackers. So yes, we have conducted a series of criminal investigations and we work with the FBI and counterintelligence officials when we get leads on these issues.
Good, thank you. To you and Mr. Seaton, with cybersecurity threats increasing, has NASA taken the necessary actions to address the assessment of the National Academy of Public Administration back in 2014 and the 9 recommendations identified by the Inspector General to keep the data secure?
Yes, happy to report that we closed out all of the recommendations. There were quite a few in the NAPA report, and those have been implemented. And I do think that they improved our security and our practices.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Burley, should the National Academy do another study to examine the vulnerabilities that teleworking presents?
The opportunity for associations and national academies to do studies gives us an in-depth look, and so I would say yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. The chair now recognizes Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Unmute button. Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. Mr. Seaton, thank you very much for joining us today. In your testimony, you mentioned that in the course of the pandemic, you were able to onboard new employees, new interns, and amazingly, our offices have been able to do the same. Wonderful interns, new staff. We've also been able to safely ensure that all staff and interns have house-issued equipment, including laptops and phones. So in the OIG report, I was surprised that personally owned devices could connect to internal systems, and that OIG was critical of your not monitoring, enforcing the rules associated with granting access to the NASA networks. So how do you make sure that new employees were given the proper equipment? And if they're not getting NASA issued equipment, how do you ensure that those personal devices are secured?
Yes, thanks. Great question. We actually do require the use of NASA-provided equipment for our new employees and interns, so we do provide them with the tools that they need. Recently, within the last 2 years, it was my office that changed the policy that was referred to earlier, where yes, previously we did allow personal devices to connect. That is no longer allowed by policy. The only allowance is for a mobile device that has a mobile device management software that we provide that creates a secure container and a secure connection back to our email and calendaring systems. If an employee will consent to us managing their personal device with that software. That's the one case where we do allow that. Where we do have opportunities to continue to strengthen our architecture is implementing the automated controls to ensure that that is what's happening. So network access control and the pandemic has actually impacted our implementation there, pushing out that schedule into next year. But we've made significant progress through DHS's CDM program to know what's on our network and who's on our network, and have a little bit more to do there.
Good. Thank you. It's encouraging to know, because I'm sure the stuff you have is much more important than the thing that's on my network. Mr. Martin, you talked about the malicious intrusions into NASA systems, unauthorized access to deep space network. Other than the person identifiable information, what are they after? And how much of this is China, Russia, the other nations that are interested in space? And will this affect, or could this affect, our lunar missions, our Mars mission, James Webb, some of the really big important things that NASA's doing?
Thank you, Congressman Beyer. NASA has vast troves of important intellectual information capital that it has spent decades amassing. And so I think country actors are after that information, the innovations that NASA is so famous for around the world. There's everything from PII, there's contractual data on the systems. So there's just a vast and wide array. And again, we've had, NASA unfortunately has been under attack from both domestic and foreign cyber criminals. And so it is just an ongoing, incredibly difficult issue to keep NASA's defenses up.
Great. Thank you very much. And Professor Burley, one of the challenges NASA has obviously is that they're so decentralized. So many of us have NASA facilities near or close. And so a one-size-fits-all is always going to be difficult. Are there other examples of systems, especially federal systems, that are similarly decentralized that have been able to effectively secure their IT systems? Are there anybody for NASA to imitate or emulate?
I think that the CIO from NASA would know better, but there are many different decentralized systems, both within the federal government and outside, that could be used as a guide to at least begin to think about best practices and other strategies for securing the networks.
Let me pivot to Mr. Seaton then quickly, because I know like the Department of Commerce had 13 different CIOs. Do you have the same challenge within NASA?
Yeah, so there is one CIO, but there are center CIOs. They all report to me. We have a single IT strategy, and for almost a decade now, we've been working to integrate and operate as a cohesive unit, acknowledging that there are some uniquenesses at our centers, but implementing consistent policies and moving towards enterprise services and contracts. So I think we are moving in the enterprise direction very significantly.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beyer. Mr. Garcia, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the testimony and the witnesses today. Very exciting times for NASA, and also very challenging with very unique dynamics in play here. I guess I've got a few questions and probably directed to all of you, Mr. Seaton, Mr. Martin, and Dr. Burley. I come from a company where I was a program director for a large air breather program, and it was both classified and unclassified elements to it. One of the big challenges that we had as a large prime was that the classified elements fell under NISPOM requirements, which I think were effectively what Chairwoman Horn was asking about on the classified side as far as compliance and requirements. Those requirements led to onerous costs to suppliers and to the lower level supply chain folks. What are we able to do? What is NASA doing, I guess, to make sure that the small businesses that are a critical element of your supply chain aren't necessarily getting overwhelmed with either cybersecurity requirements or cybersecurity development work, software development work, and therefore almost being dissuaded from entering into this industry, into this support chain? Are we able to provide GFI or GF government furnished IP to make sure and flow down to the lower level suppliers to make sure that they're baking in some of these cybersecurity elements into their respective programs, or how do we communicate, I guess, with those lower tier supply chain folks? I guess, Mr. Seaton, we can start with you.
Sure. I will say that as a challenge, making sure that all of our suppliers and providers appreciate the significance of cybersecurity and are building that into the solutions they deliver is a requirement of doing business today, right? Today with supply chain risk management, just in August, Section 889 was enacted that requires us to certify that anybody we're doing business with complies with supply chain restrictions that are federal wide. So we're working with our providers and suppliers to make sure they understand and that they build that into their practices.
Yeah, we got to just make sure we're balancing the risk mitigation efforts, which are absolutely critical and essential. We have to do it with the cost elements and just making sure that we're not driving some of these key suppliers out of business or out of our industry or out of your business, right? I know that's a delicate balancing act as well.
True. The cost of having a compromise is significant too, though. So you're right. It is a balancing act, and we'll continue to try to work.
Are the primes or tier one suppliers actively looking to package up programs or software, programs to download to the lower level suppliers, or is it sort of ad hoc depending on what the threat is and what the threat mitigation measure is?
Yeah, unfortunately, I really can't speak to the individual practices of the companies and suppliers.
Okay, and then I guess from just characterizing classified versus unclassified, are you able to speak to what percentage of your networks are on classified networks, and is one of the sides lagging the other? In other words, do you see more threats on the classified side, or fewer threats, but maybe more, more critical impact to those networks, or how would you characterize the deltas there between unclass versus the high side?
Yeah, so my office is responsible for the unclassified side. We work with our Office of Protective Services on the classified side. I can't really speak in this forum to kind of the division there, but I will say that oftentimes compromises on the unclassified side can be used to propagate to other systems and so that's a concern even on the unclassified side. Okay, great.
Yeah. And Mr. Martin or Dr. Burley, I don't know if you guys care to comment on either of those topics there.
We have little to no work on the classified side at NASA.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay. So I would just, we hosted a small business summit with Kevin McCarthy as well, and NASA with NASA Administrator Bridenstine a couple of weeks ago. The cost of entry into the supply chain for all space programs is pretty high for some of these small suppliers. So I would just end with let's try to enable them. Let's make sure we're giving them the tools to be successful and be able to defend not only their networks but yours, obviously, as your suppliers as we navigate this challenge and hopefully look to synergize lessons learned and download those through contracts requirement flow down documents accordingly. So Really appreciate your guys' time, and good luck with the upcoming launches as well, guys. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. And now for the honorary member of our subcommittee who is reliable and with us, Mr. Weber, you're recognized for 5 minutes. If we can get you unmuted. There you go.
There we go. There's a lot of people who want to mute me, but nonetheless, thank you for that, Chairwoman. And I appreciate the opportunity of being here. You actually asked a question to Mr. Seaton earlier, I think, about how many attempts, intrusion attempts per month did NASA identify last year. And I want to kind of follow up on that by saying, how does that compare, Mr. Seaton, to the intrusion attempts per month this year during COVID? Are you making a distinction there?
Yeah, so not that direct comparison, and we see fluctuations based on our insight, and that insight, as I mentioned, is increasing. So sometimes that is the cause for a higher number, but we have seen an increase in phishing attacks and malware attacks at various times throughout the pandemic. That hasn't been steady, it's been fluctuating.
Any idea, guess, 10%, 20%, 5% increase?
At one point, over a given period of time, we saw a doubling of phishing attacks. But again, there have been other weeks where it's been lower. So I do think because of the pandemic, people are looking for the opportunity to attack, and will continue to.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about, having personal devices and being at home and those kinds of security firewalls, if you will. And if it's sensitive information, I know you said you worked with the FBI and some other forces or task force, well, I forget the terminology you used, but if that's sensitive information, if you could get it to us, it would be interesting for us to get it to my staff. And I want to follow up in your discussion with Mr. Garcia. Y'all talked about, well, before I do that, let me go to Mr. Martin really quick. Mr. Martin, understanding that this hearing is supposed to be narrowly focused on cyber threats during COVID, since you're here with us, I thought it'd be appropriate to discuss some of the things we've been talking about with China, for example. During this intellectual property threats, obviously, to the aerospace U.S. supply chain, you all talked about it a little bit, I think you and Mr. Garcia. During this week's Air Force Association Aerospace and Cyber Conference, it was revealed that longtime DoD and NASA launch provider ULA, proactively, I don't know if you're familiar with this, proactively identified and cut ties with the supplier that was a security risk due to Chinese ownership. Were you aware of that, Mr. Martin?
I was not, Congressman.
Okay. Well, in comments earlier, I think I'll go back to Mr. Seaton with his exchange with Garcia. He said he couldn't speak to suppliers or speak for the suppliers. Was that what you were saying to Mr. Garcia?
I said that I could not speak to how they were structuring their business operations to meet the federal requirements.
Shouldn't that be something that we're looking at? I mean, I don't mean to sound too skeptical, but shouldn't NASA and all of our U.S. space and defense companies should be taking a proactive posture to know exactly what safeguards are in place for our supply chain?
Totally agree. So how they go about doing it is what I'm saying, that we're not in their business operations. Validating that they are complying with the requirements is something that we've been doing for years with our supply chain risk management efforts, ensuring the things that we buy are free of risks through coordination with the FBI, and now making sure that even within their organizations, they do not have IT equipment provided by prohibited providers. So yes, we are actively involved in ensuring that level of compliance.
Well, you say how they go about it, you're not necessarily involved in, but shouldn't there be some level of protocol, for lack of a better term, some threshold, some safeguard? They have to meet minimum safeguards, and somebody has to be looking over their shoulder in that regard. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, again, compliance with our cybersecurity requirements is absolutely critical, and that is our responsibility. How their business practices is what I'm saying that we are not getting in the middle of.
Would you say that in this particular instance where that supplier was identified, that it would be worthwhile to go back and see exactly how that happened, how that supplier got the proverbial camel's nose under the tent?
I think it's in the federal government's best interest to understand where vulnerabilities emanate from, so certainly.
Whose responsibility is that?
I think it's a shared responsibility.
Between who?
Between the federal agencies that are responsible for our cybersecurity policy, as well as an agency that would be interacting with a specific provider.
Is that something you could follow up with our office on and tell us who those agencies are and who has responsibility for that agency? And I'm talking about addressing this particular instance and how it was discovered and how we got there and what steps are going to be taken to prevent similar occurrences. Can you follow up with us on that?
Certainly. We'll take that as a question for the record, yes.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. Appreciate your questions and, as always, your participation in the subcommittee. I think I have a few more questions I want to follow up with, and we'll have an opportunity for the members to do another round of questions if everyone is available to stay, since we still have time. I want to follow up on a couple of things, going back to some of the earlier questions about the unauthorized devices or personal devices, and then I do want to follow up Mr. Weber's line of questions a little bit more. Mr. Martin, the August 2020 IG report on unauthorized devices, which was, of course, just this year on NASA's network, cites CIO's office saying that there are currently no authoritative way to obtain the number of partner-owned IT devices. And I know, Mr. Seaton, you mentioned that you're not allowing that anymore, but it seems that that's still happening. So, Mr. Martin, I'm wondering what the risks are of not being able to identify and why that may be the case from your perspective in this report. And then, Mr. Seaton, I want to follow up with you about what NASA is doing to improve its understanding and insight into those devices. So, Mr. Martin, if you want to start with that.
Sure. If I could say at the outset, NASA, as I said in my oral remarks, NASA has been searching for that balance between user flexibility and system security. And during the 10 years that I've been at NASA, it has somewhat wildly lurched from those extremes. I remember early on, a number of years ago, where they had a BYOD policy, which was a bring your own device policy. And that's how sort of forward-leaning NASA was about allowing employees and even contractors to use their personal devices. Now, in the last couple of years, NASA has taken a much more measured approach and have focused recently, but there's still gaps that remain in the security of these mobile devices. So as you indicated in the report that we issued just last month, they have implemented software, but they haven't fully implemented the controls to remove or block devices from NASA systems that shouldn't be on that NASA system. And they're also not adequately monitoring the business rules for granting access with a personal device to NASA's network. They're not enforcing consistently the business need for that. And they're also not ensuring that each of the mobile devices, the personal mobile devices that connect to the system, don't violate supply chain rules.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Martin. Mr. Seaton, I know you've taken steps in that direction. Can you speak to, I know there's been a delay, but what you're doing, what NASA's doing to address these holes? It sounds like you've made progress, but what is NASA and what is CIO doing to address these other outstanding issues?
Sure. Actually, as an agency, I believe, I think we have been a leader in implementing the DHS's Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation program, where CDM Phase 1 identified what was on the network. And so we have tools in place to automatically detect what's on the network. Phase 2, which we are in the middle of implementing right now, is controlling who is on the network. And that gets to the network access control element that Mr. Martin spoke of. And again, I think we will in the coming year be able to, in enable those controls to be able to have a technology-based way to enforce the policy that has been issued by my office.
Thank you very much. And just following up on a couple of Mr. Weber's questions, in terms of the insight, getting back to some of the first questions about contractor requirements and how we control for suppliers and information. There's a balance between overly burdensome requirements and the opportunity for bad actors to influence or to gain access. And I'm wondering, Mr. Martin, what you see as potential authorities that NASA may need to be able to have additional insight or control or contracting provisions to ensure that there's compliance all the way up and down the supply chain. Is it with the primes, or are there other provisions that may be needed?
I'm actually going to answer that question by focusing in-house on NASA. We have commented for we did an audit in 2014 and a follow-up in 2017. And one of our concerns is just how NASA is structured, where is Jeff or whoever's sitting in the CIO's position doesn't have full insight into all of NASA's systems. In fact, doesn't have full control over the IT spend and enforcing the IT security requirements, particularly in mission systems and center-based systems. Jeff and his colleagues have full control over what's known as the institutional systems, but they make up about 25 or 30% of NASA's overall budget. So the lack of insight and oversight, wielding the stick that controls the money on the end of it, is a real governance issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. And Mr. Seaton, do you want to speak to that quickly? It sounds like you need, to be able to do that, you need additional authorities or insight and oversight.
Actually, I think that has been changing. I sit on the Agency Program Management Council, the Mission Support Council, and the Acquisition Strategy Council as a full member. So I have insight into major agency decisions, and the administration fully supports the programs and plans that we're putting in place. And then the collaboration with the missions to ensure their systems are secure, where we now have much more widespread, effective, consistent approaches to authorities to operate. And I've been working with the Council of Deputies within NASA to ensure that we have the appropriate mission leadership, senior executives designated as authorizing officials for those mission systems. So I do think we're making significant progress, excuse me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Seaton. Mr. Babin, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Do you have more questions?
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I do have some more questions. I wanted to address this to all the witnesses if possible. How many intrusion attempts per month did NASA identify last year? How does that compare to the intrusion attempts per month this year during COVID? And if this information is sensitive, please provide a response to the staff after the hearing concludes.
Yeah, if I could take the specifics as a question for the record, but I can speak in more general terms. As I mentioned before, I think the measurement of intrusions continues to fluctuate based on our insight into the network, and that has increased. So in some cases where we see an increase in intrusions, it's because we're seeing more of what's happening. And we're to the point now we've got, I think, a pretty solid visibility into our network today. But then a comparison of specific month by month, we'll have to take that and get back to you.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think I will yield back there, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babin. Mr. Byer, you're recognized.
Madam Chair, I have no more questions. I keep learning, but I yield back.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a real quick question. The old adage that the best defense is a good offense is kind of appropriate here. Mr. Seaton, are you happy with the support that you're getting from other government agencies in terms of the development at a national level? We develop offensive cyber capabilities that informs your defensive cyber techniques and vulnerabilities. Are you comfortable and satisfied with the communications, I'll just say, to other government agencies that should be informing you as to where the state of the art is going in terms of offensive cyber capabilities, which may, be in the hands of the bad guys and be within our own domestic networks? If not, where can we help to maybe improve your ability to leverage the developments of other equities outside of NASA?
Yeah, I think the administration has been very supportive of our need to continue with the appropriate focus on cybersecurity. And I think that NASA has effective relationships with our counterparts that can provide us counterintelligence information, as well as best practices on cybersecurity. The Federal CIO Council, the CIOs across the federal agencies engaging to share information is another effective mechanism for that information sharing.
Okay, so the historical, I'll call it just historical evidence over the last, call it 2 years, though, have there been any surprises, I guess, from the threats where it was a completely unknown rider coming in through an unknown technique or vulnerability that really hadn't been discussed? I know there's sensitivities around how much you can say here, but any sort of unknown riders that just completely caught you off guard that we ultimately found out another equity throughout the government maybe had been aware of?
Yeah, I think because of the dynamic landscape, we're going to face surprises. We want to minimize those, right?
Sure, yeah.
But I will say that there have been times when other agencies have observed activity and contacted NASA, and then we would partner on that. So again, I think the communication mechanisms are there.
That's good. Well, that's encouraging to hear. A lot of these lessons learned have been learned, several times before. So if we can avoid duplication of lessons learned, especially in this cyber domain, that's a huge benefit to you guys. So
certainly.
Thank you. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Garcia, and thank you to all of our members for the thoughtful, intentional questions, and to all of our witnesses. It's clear that these are critically important issues that NASA is facing, as well as some important lessons learned during COVID-19, as Dr. Burley stated, that these are not normal times. So our strategies during COVID-19 are important, but also inform cybersecurity more broadly. And I think that it sounds as that NASA is making progress, but that as the authorizing committee, we want to ensure that you have sufficient authorities and funding capabilities to have strong cybersecurity practices and protocol in place, and we continue to move forward with the recommendations and implementations from the GAO and other strategies that ensure not just the 25% that you have direct authority over, but the contractors, especially given some of the things that we have seen. So unless any of our members have further questions, we'll bring this hearing to a close today. I want to thank again the witnesses for your testimony and for your time and for what you do. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional statements from the members and additional questions of the committee, or that the committee or members may ask of the witnesses. Thank you all again for your time. The witnesses are excused and the hearing is now adjourned. Thanks, everybody.